Hello and welcome once again to Radical Freedom. I'm Kurt Waldrop, your host. Starting this episode, we're going to have our guest Wolfie here. He's been around the world with me. My wife gave me this just before we got married when I was traveling, and he's been with me ever since. So I think he's going to be my mascot here in these series of videos. The subject matter of this video is the Second Amendment. Last week there was a terrible tragedy. A crazy person with a firearm killed a bunch of people in Las Vegas, Nevada. Because of this, there are a lot of people that think this is a good time to try to take away gun rights from law-abiding citizens. So we're going to discuss the Second Amendment, what it means, and why maybe that's not such a good idea to try to take people's rights away when it comes to the ability to be armed. Now, the argument is that when the amendment was written, it was to protect the rights of Americans to own single-shot muskets, and that was it. And many people say that if the actual writers of the Second Amendment had foreseen the invention of semi-automatic weapons, they probably would have either changed the wording of the Second Amendment or done away with it completely. And besides, some people would say that the Second Amendment was all about hunting. I've heard this stated many times. What good is that gun for hunting? Well, let's look at the actual wording of the Second Amendment and see if there's anything mentioning about hunting in it, or, let's just kind of find out what the fuss is about. It very clearly states that a well-regulated militia, being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, a lot of people want to just look at that last part, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the rest does have meaning, and it's not to the advantage of the left. I would like to look first, and we'll come back to it, but this is the only amendment that has the word shall not be infringed. Something to think about. And to infringe means anything that interferes in any way with the exercise of the right that this is supposed to guarantee. Now, well-regulated, what did that actually mean? Back in the 1700s, well-regulated just meant functioning properly. So a well-regulated watch or clock just meant that it was a clock that would keep good time. So a well-functioning militia in this case. Now, let's look at militia. Many people, when they think of militia, they think of a bunch of good old boys wearing camouflage, running around the woods with their AK-47s or AR-15s. And they're out there ready to shoot up the government if they come after them. Well, of course, that's just crazy talk, but wait, is it? I would like to put to you that is one of the scenarios that the founders actually included the Second Amendment for, so that the average American, not necessarily portrayed that way that the TV and movies like to portray, but the average American has the ability to fight the government if it ever became a tyranny. Some people will say, well, the militia is the National Guard. It sort of is. The militia originally was the citizen soldiers that fought alongside of our regular army. Back in the Revolutionary War, in the War of 1812, Mexican War, and the Civil War, both in the North and the South, militias fought with the regular army. In the Spanish-American War, Teddy Roosevelt actually was the colonel of or lieutenant colonel, if you want to be specific, of a militia unit, the Rough Riders. There was then a bill that created the National Guard, and some, but not all, of the militia units then became part of the National Guard. Today, the National Guard can be used by governors for, state-level emergencies. It can be used from anything from making people stop rioting to helping people get into schools, like was used in some of the southern states during the Civil Rights era. But do we have a constitutional right to join the National Guard? If so, that means when I'm 97 years old and I might weigh 500 pounds and think I was a duck, I could join the National Guard. That would be a bit odd. Now, it would also seem that one easy way to figure out exactly what the Second Amendment was all about is to read the actual words of the people who wrote it, or the people who were there when it was written. George Mason, who was actually one of the writers of the Second Amendment, stated that, "Sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people. To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way of enslaving them." So, one of the things the Second Amendment was written for is so that the government could not enslave us. It couldn't become a tyranny. Again, you see, this is not necessarily about the right to own a gun to go out and hunt. It's about keeping us from being enslaved. Well, it's a strange coincidence that some of the very first gun control laws actually were written and put into effect in slave states, both before the Civil War and after. Now, true, they didn't affect everyone equally. It was mostly aimed at slaves, former slaves, the offspring of slaves, but okay. Let's not quibble about details here. Let's just say that the origin of many of our American gun control laws was racism. Simple as that. Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders and one of our wisest people, who, even though he was a slave owner, he was actually anti-slave. More about that in another video. When he wrote the first draft of the Virginia Constitution, he actually stated that no free man would ever be debarred the use of arms. So he felt that it was important for a free person not only to be able to own firearms, but that they actually should. James Madison, who's often considered the father of the Constitution, went on to say that the Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed that Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. So if you're wondering if we're ever becoming a tyranny, when the government starts becoming afraid to trust law-abiding citizens with firearms, that might be a sign that something is wrong. So it would seem that the framers not only wanted us to have the freedom to own the weapons, but thought that it is important to actually own them. Now, okay, this is what 5 minutes of research could to tell any interested party. You could learn all of the stuff I've just gone over. But what has the Supreme Court had to say about it? Because after all, remember, they're the ones who actually interpret the Constitution, whether no matter what it actually says, they come up with their own meanings. Well, in a case in 1939 called the United States versus Miller, the court upheld the Federal Firearms Act of 1934. Now, what that did, among other things, was it outlawed automatic weapons, sawed-off shotguns, and short-barreled rifles, also silencers. Now, one of the things that we were just talking about militias is that, they should be able to stand up to actual full-blown military forces. Well, Justice McReynolds, writing for the court, and I have to paraphrase this, but he basically said the Second Amendment only applies to weapons that can be used by a militia and those that should be of a sort common to the military. Okay, well, now this particular case was about a person owning a sawed-off shotgun, and they didn't look at the others, but it would seem like he just said it was fine that you shouldn't have to pay the tax and go jump through all of the hoops required to own a full automatic weapon because it's a common military weapon. Well, that goes against everything most people have ever been taught. Now, later, the Supreme Court looked at several other cases. One of them was called Heller versus the District of Columbia, or the District of Columbia versus Heller, and they actually reaffirmed the right for individuals to own weapons for personal protection. Now, in the Declaration of Independence, the founders were talking about what rights the government cannot give us because we already have them. Now, they spoke specifically about life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. English common law, which was actually before the Declaration of Independence guaranteed people the right to self-defense. Now, of course, England has gotten way away from that, but that was the roots of our legal system. Now, based on that, the Second Amendment would apply to defending the USA as a citizen soldier in time of invasion, hunting, target shooting, self-defense, and even defending one's liberty from governmental tyranny. Now, some would argue that we need to make more laws to make sure that the bad people that have weapons don't use them with evil intent. But I have to ask you, aren't there already a lot of laws about that on the books? Aren't there already laws that say you're not supposed to shoot at people? Aren't there laws even that say you shouldn't murder people? I don't think making an extra law would really stop criminals from doing that. Otherwise, you could put up a no robbery zone on banks, just put up that sign, and expect criminals to look at it and go, oh man, I was going to rob this place, but I didn't realize I had the sign. I got to find a different place. You could put up a sign on the highway that said, this is a drunk driving free zone. And of course, that would eliminate all drunk drivers. Just to note, most of the mass shootings that have taken place in the United States have taken place in so-called gun-free zones. Schools, universities, hospitals, a church, churches actually. So apparently the bad guys aren't reading the signs. But one of the things that I actually find hilarious, no, I would if it weren't so tragic, are the signs where they just put the handgun and they put a circle around it with a line through it. That I assume is for for illiterate criminals. For an example of this, not the sign, but the gun laws, the city of Chicago, right now it's October 2017. The city of Chicago so far this year has had over 530 people killed by firearms. That's just this year. And as a reminder, they have some of the strictest firearm laws in the United States. Now, while many on the left think it's counterintuitive, from the early 1990s to the present, gun ownership has increased dramatically. Almost as dramatically as gun ownership has increased, violent crime has actually decreased. Now, this would lead me to think there might be some correlation between a large number of law-abiding citizens owning firearms and criminals going, maybe I shouldn't just go out there and try to steal something from them or try to attack them or try to shoot at them because they might shoot back. More and more people have the ability to defend themselves. The left loves to demonize organizations such as the NRA and other gun advocacy groups, but the shooters in these violent crimes aren't members. I can't recall a single time that an NRA member has been the person who committed a mass shooting. Give me an example of one of those. They're usually, oddly enough, former members or current members of Democrat Party organizations. The other thing about the NRA, by the way, and groups like it, they're actually standing up for our constitutional rights. We have the American Civil Liberties Union, but they already have said they will not stand up for gun rights. Aren't they supposed to defend the entire Constitution? Aren't we? So I think that there is an important role for the NRA and groups like it for all law-abiding Americans. Now, I would actually like to take this moment to point out that myself and Wolfie here, we're both feminists too. Now, different people have different meanings for feminists. For me, it means that everybody's equal under the law regardless of what your plumbing is. Anyone who can do a job should be allowed to do the job. Nothing should be excluded from someone just because of their sex. If a woman can do a job, and if she can do it better than a guy, so be it. Good for her. I hate waste. The problem is that in general, men and women are not equal. The average male has a lot more upper body strength than the average female. the average male is faster than the average female. That means that the average male, if he decides to commit a violent act against a woman, if he wants to rape her or beat her up or steal from her, if they're, in all things else being equal, he's going to be able to do it. But there's an old saying in the Old West, God created man. Samuel Colt made them equal. That means that with a firearm, it doesn't matter if you have more physical upper body strength. A woman who's been taught how to defend herself with a firearm is the equal of any man. And that just means they get to live without fear. The women that I personally know who have discovered shooting as a sport say that it's very liberating, it's very empowering, that they never have to live afraid again. They know that they have a gun. They can defend themselves against any psychopath, no matter how big and scary they might be. So, in order to balance things out, I personally think that every woman should be taught how to use a firearm. If I had a daughter, she certainly would. I could go a step further and say everyone, male and female, should be taught the use of firearms. Because if we're going to assume that all people are basically honest, you just have that small criminal element, then making the honest person able to fight back against the bad guy, again, just like I was saying for women, it would be a very liberating and very empowering experience. This will allow a woman to defend her family against violent attackers, or for that matter, a man. You have that case in Connecticut where two thugs broke in. By the way, when I say thug, I just mean thug. It's not a racial term. These particular thugs were white. They broke into someone's house. They beat him to within an inch of his life. They raped his wife. And then they took the two teenage daughters, tied them to their beds, poured gasoline on them, and set them on fire. The man was able to save himself, but his entire family died, all because he didn't have a firearm. I can't imagine what it's like to be him, but I would be guilty the rest of my life. That would be the most horrible thing I can even imagine. Other arguments against guns like to point out that what a violent nation the United States is because they're easy to get. Well, relatively easy to get. But gun ownership doesn't make this a violent country. Actually, far from it. As nations around the world go, if you look for the number of violent gun crimes per 100,000 people, we're not that high up at all. A lot of nations are worse off than we are. And a lot of those nations actually have very strict gun laws in place. Mexico, for example. Russia, for example. So when you measure it against the population, we do pretty good. And by the way, as far as violent crimes, no, they may not have firearms, or at least they may not have a lot of them, but England beats us out on the violent crime front. So much for safe, secure England. Now, some make an emotional argument that they just don't feel safe around guns. It just makes them feel uncomfortable. Like I said, the women in my life, they feel empowered by firearms. They feel safer when they know that there is a loaded gun around, especially when they have control of it right now. So I would think that, logic would say that people should learn how to use this thing, become comfortable with it. After all, a firearm is just like any other tool. A hammer can kill a person, but it can also build a house. You could kill a person with a chainsaw, or you could cut up firewood for the winter. You could run them down with a car, or you could drive to work every day to make money for your family. More people in the United States are actually killed by hammers than by AR-15s every year. That's an FBI statistic, folks. And the weapon of choice in the Bastille Day Massacre, I believe that was, 2 years ago now? Wasn't an automatic weapon or even a semi-automatic weapon. It was a truck. I guess it was one of those big, scary assault trucks with the high-capacity fuel tanks, maybe. They killed 84 people with a truck. But I haven't heard a single word about outlawing trucks. The Second Amendment is the only amendment, like I said earlier, that has the word shall not be infringed. Yet, it is the one that more Americans want to infringe than any other. Now, I realize for some, as I said a moment ago, it is an emotional response. They don't feel comfortable around firearms. But you can either choose to remain ignorant about them and allow your emotions to make you afraid, or I can challenge you to learn about this tool, use it to empower yourself and your family and keep them safe. If you make a conscious decision to remain ignorant, I personally don't want to know you anyway, because I have one prejudice in life, and that's the person who remains ignorant by choice. Now, thank you very much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed the video. If you don't, let me know in the comments down below why. If you did like it, let me know in the comments down below why. Please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and also, when you get a chance, go to Amazon.com, take a look at my book, Radical Freedom. It may come up under Radical Freedom. It may come up under Radical Freedom, oh crap, there goes the Constitution, or just by my name, Kurt Waldrop. So hopefully you'll do that. Hopefully you'll come back and see my next video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Kurt Waldrop. Good night. Good day. Good afternoon. See you later. That's the one. Bye-bye.